Good morning. Let me introduce myself. I'm Evan Kleiman. I'm the host of Good Food on KCRW. I would like to welcome you to this town hall this morning featuring Representative Adam Schiff and Rick Nahmias, in which we discuss issues of food insecurity, food waste, and ways in which we can address these two topics for a healthier environment, a healthier community. We're so lucky in having these two men together in conversation. Congressman Adam Schiff represents the 28th district, as you know. That district is enormous, one of the most diverse in the country. It stretches all the way from West Hollywood to Pasadena and from Echo Park to the Angeles National Forest. Rick Nahmias, who I know very well over the years and originally met when he was a photographer documenting workers in the fields of California agriculture, is the founder and executive director of Food Forward. Food Forward is an unusually virtuous circle that takes food that would be just thrown away or turned under and reassigns it to people who are in need and hungry. I think this is going to be a marvelous conversation, and I asked Representative Schiff if he would start off with a few remarks.
Oh, Evan, thank you very much, and what a pleasure to join you and Rick, and I'm so grateful for all the great work that you both do, and the need is just tremendous right now. One of the few ways I've been able to see and interact with my constituents these days, apart from Zoom, is to participate in food delivery. And so I've had an opportunity with Project Angel Food, with Meals on Wheels and other providers to go out and help deliver meals to people who are food insecure. And when you do that, you really get to see a couple of things. One, you get to see just the tremendous volume of food deliveries and food assistance that's going out right now. You also get to see, frankly, how desperately in need many of these volunteer organizations are for more volunteers, because people have been afraid to go out. So the demand is greater, but the volunteer workforce is more needed than ever. But you also see the face of those who are going hungry right now, and the hardship. A couple of weeks ago, I was delivering a meal in Hollywood. And the resident I was delivering it to lived on the second floor of an apartment. It was about 100 degrees out. It felt like about 90 degrees in her apartment, standing on the threshold. And she held $500 in unpaid utility bills in her hand and said that she couldn't afford to pay both the rent and her utilities, and she couldn't afford to lose her home. So she was holding off on paying the utility bills and was worried that that one fan she had to keep cool was going to stop turning. And without the food, she didn't know what she would do. This is, the predicament facing millions of people. Going into the pandemic, there was already a crisis of food insecurity. Now that has become much more dire, with 25% of adults, 30% of children insecure about where their next meal is going to come from. So I look forward to the discussion today about what's being done, what more can be done, what role the public can play, and making sure that in the most prosperous country on earth, no one goes hungry, especially during this time of need.
Thank you. Rick Nahmias, it's your opportunity now to tell us a bit about the work you do that addresses some of these concerns illuminated for us by Representative Schiff.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you, Congressman. I want to just start off by saying, Congressman, I feel indebted to you for the work you've done in Congress all this time, but especially in this last 4 years, speaking, truth to power and keeping our Constitution front and center. So thank you for that work. Food Forward was founded in 2009 at our last economic downturn, when I saw fruit going to waste in my own neighborhood and saw this direct correlation of over 1 million residential fruit trees that were barely touched in Southern California being a source of sustainable produce for folks in need in Los Angeles and beyond. Little did I know that 11 years later, we would have collected over 100 million pounds of fresh produce from various sources and gotten it to folks in need. We do this through 2 volunteer programs, backyard harvesting, where we actually do exactly what I said, send people out to residential homes, college campuses, public parks, and glean that produce, mostly citrus, from trees that otherwise would go to waste. That is immediately within hours given into pantries and churches and shelters, over 250 direct service agencies in just Los Angeles County and the surrounding region, and over 2,000 Southern California wide. Add to that our second program, which is farmers markets. Pre-COVID, we were at 25 farmers markets with volunteer teams who were gleaning produce from local farmers who had unsold produce at the end of every market session. We're currently now at about 10 or 12 markets and slowly climbing our way back up as safety protocols are put back in place. The big kahuna for us, though, was the wholesale market. LA's produce terminal is the largest volume market on the continent and allows for pallets of produce that would otherwise be orphaned or wasted for no good reason at all, going into the trash, to be recovered and donated to us, which is then passed off to, again, these hundreds of agencies. We've kind of been a B2B for most of our existence, getting agencies food that then get it to the front lines. But over the last few years, we've actually been partnering with many great agencies like WLCAC and Social Justice Learning Institute in Inglewood to actually be shoulder to shoulder with those folks who are giving out the food. We are a anti-hunger and food waste organization. We address 2 sides of the coin, and we come at this as an independent organization, not part of any affiliation. We've seen this year alone our impact grow from about 26 million pounds to this year. We will actually, at the end of this week, we will hit 40 million pounds for 2020 alone, with 800,000 boxes from the USDA Farmer to Family program going out in these last months as well. So it's been a crazy ride. The organization's grown exponentially every year. And ironically, this was supposed to be a breather year for our staff. And they're doing twice as much work and delivering twice as much fresh produce to those in need because it's there and because folks are suffering right now.
You know, this morning when I got up to scan the newspapers, as I do every morning, I was reading an article in the San Francisco Chronicle about how in California, hunger, food insecurity rates have risen 3 times and much more in some counties. So since this pandemic took hold, can you speak about what the 2 of you are seeing and hearing in regards to increased food insecurity and hunger rates? And then can both of you address what's being done in particular now? I mean, hunger isn't new. It's something that's always been with us, this intractable problem linked to poverty. That we didn't have our hands around before this crisis started.
I'm happy to start on that, Evan. I think from the micro level, we saw prior to COVID in LA and the 6 surrounding counties, which is our core areas of support, approximately 2 to 2.5 million food insecure individuals. To put that in perspective, that is greater than the population of New Mexico. To me, this is incredibly shameful, coming from a region that in the 50s and 60s was the leading agricultural provider for the entire country. The fact that that ratio has just flipped and we now have more hungry people than any place in the country is shameful, especially when there's all these resources at our disposal to do it. So from the food waste perspective, which is very much the one that Food Forward comes from, we're talking about and looking at how do we repurpose things that are already grown, things that are already in our system. We have seen, again, just outrageous spikes. We saw from a 2-time growth up to 6 times need since COVID. And 40% of low income households are food insecure right now, and up to 40 to 45% of people of color households are food insecure. So just like COVID is inadvertently um, basically affecting more folks of color and of low income, so is the hunger situation as well.
And also many folks who previously never thought of themselves as being low income or poor or without resources are being pushed into that position through no fault of their own. Congressman Schiff, could you speak to what work you are able to do right now during this period of time, how the federal government is helping and what you're working on?
Sure. And, Evan, I just want to pick up on that last point that you were making about how people who never view themselves as in need of help now find themselves very much in need of help. That was really brought home to me when I was doing some volunteering work at the Burbank Temporary Aid Center, when the executive director told me that people that used to come in to volunteer and help are now coming in for food themselves. And I'm sure that in the past, when they would come in to volunteer and help, they didn't imagine that one day that they would be in such circumstances where they would be in need of that help themselves. But that is how this pandemic has affected so many. But before the pandemic, as Rich was saying, there was already tremendous food insecurity and need. I introduced a bill last year called the Food for Thought Act to try to expand the free and reduced lunch program that exists K-12 up through community college, because I found that so many college students in California and around the country are food insecure. I remember meeting, this was probably 2 or 3 years ago, with trustees of some of the colleges in my district, and they were telling me how they had food banks. Every one of them had a food bank on their campus. And I asked them whether there was the same need for food banks back in the recession in 2009. And the answer was no, that the need was greater now. And this is pre-pandemic. And I thought this was really quite telling, because the economy was much better now than it had been in 2009. At least it had been before the pandemic. But the food insecurity was greater, which tells us something about the way our economy has operated and left people behind. This incredible disparity of wealth and growing disparity, because of course hunger is an economic condition as well as a social condition. And so coming into this pandemic, we were already struggling with this problem, but it has become so much more severe. In the early Family First Act, so the initial version of the CARES package during the pandemic, we took action to strengthen the SNAP program and the WIC program to help provide food with a very effective mechanism that was already in existence, but we provided an enhanced pandemic benefit where families could use an electronic card and get up to $365 more per child to help with their food needs. But those efforts are running out. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important that we pass another bill, the Families First Act, the CARES legislation that provided resources for these very food insecure families in need. That assistance is running out. Some of the programs that have been administered are coming to an end next month. The Farmers to Family program, which I know Rich has worked with, which has been very important to make sure that we got this food and surplus food to families, is set to expire next month. The USDA is changing and doing away with some of the waivers that allowed the commodity supplemental food program also to thrive, and that has already significantly limited participation by families in need. So we took some important steps. Those steps now are expiring or the waivers are being withdrawn. And we are once again adding to the roles of the food insecure instead of dealing with the problem.
Before we go on with more discussion, I just want to invite the audience to post your questions, if you have them, into the Facebook chat. and so that I have an opportunity to bring your questions to Congressman Schiff and Rick Nahmias when we finish our initial chat. You know, one of the things I think about a lot as I do the interviews I do for my show is how poverty, hunger, food waste, climate change, and public health are linked. How public health, how all of these crises seem to be essentially public health crises. And I'm wondering if you can ever see a day when, rather than attacking this problem piecemeal, little bits at a time, however your Congress is able to do it, if you can imagine an omnibus bill or some kind of solution that recognizes how deep and intractable the problem is.
You know, I think, and this was a point I was getting at earlier, the result of the last 25 years of economic policies which have allowed, you know, the very wealthy to prosper even more, but have resulted in middle-class families struggling to hold their ground, and it make it more difficult for working families to become part of the middle class, that have resulted in expanding poverty instead of reducing it. That's probably among the most important reforms that we need to make sure the economy works for everyone, that everyone can earn a livable wage and get by and put food on the table. If we don't do that, then the rest are going to be inadequate Band-Aids. You know, they may be more comprehensive Band-Aids than others, but they're all going to be inadequate if people can't earn a decent living. So I would begin there. Now, part of it, as you say, is also healthcare. If people can't afford healthcare, if healthcare bankrupts families, then of course they're going to be thrown into poverty and food insecurity. So we also need a healthcare system that's universal and workable and quality and affordable. Although, you know, even with both those things, I think we're always going to have a need for programs like SNAP and like WIC, and for philanthropic efforts like Rick is undertaking. And there's so much more we can do to eliminate waste when, you know, there are estimates, and Rick is far more expert about this, 30 or 40% of agricultural produce may go to waste, let alone the produce that Rick's organization harvests from residential areas. So in the immediate term, I think we have to deal with the crisis at hand. And in the HEROES Act, we have $10 billion more for the SNAP program. And we have another $1 billion for the WIC program to make sure that we get resources and food out to people who need it right now. But in the longer term, we need to deal with these structural problems in the economy, structural problems with access to healthcare, and structural problems in terms of how much food just goes to waste because of the way that our farm subsidies and other farming issues have impacted our production and the use of that food.
Yeah.
Rick, we're seeing it this week here in California and Oregon, Washington, the result of climate change on the ground now. Can you speak a bit about how food waste plays into climate change?
Yeah, food waste is epidemic. It is the most wasted category of food, or fruits and vegetables, which is what we deal with exclusively. And basically a third of all produced fruits and vegetables never make it off the farm. It's kind of to wrap your head around that fact alone, that the inefficiencies and the systems that we need to address right there, that, you know, I've been a proponent of the concept that hunger is not a supply problem, it's a distribution problem. And one of the things that I've been so impressed with the USDA program, the Farmers to Family boxes that we've been involved with on the produce side, is that this is not just a way to feed people, but this is a way to mitigate these horrible images we saw early in COVID of all this beautiful produce being plowed under. And I just feel like, while I have an opportunity to speak with the congressman, to understand that this is definitely a triage situation, but that program has built a really quick infrastructure and scaffolding upon which these systems change models can progress after the pandemic subsides. And I would impress upon Congress and those in the Agriculture Committee to really look at some of the things that have been beautifully put together. I never would have thought that our federal government in 15 days could bring a program that would deliver 100 million boxes of mostly wholesome food to people in the way it has. Yes, there have been hiccups. Yes, there have been problems. But I hope these programs are not just dismantled and tossed onto the shelf, but that there's actually learning that goes on. And as we see it, and as we've seen clearly documented by great studies such as Project Drawdown, food waste is the third most largest problem that we see around climate change. And we have the tools here in the US to mitigate that while we're solving hunger. And so I think those kind of double down approaches need to be put forth with greater weight. At the same time, there is absolutely no question that income disparity, racial disparity that we've seen have all got to be addressed, because we're seeing folks being hit by hunger and COVID at a rate that's unprecedented in these underserved communities. And it just adds to these pools of despair and digs us deeper into the hole. But I do think, coming from the environmental standpoint, when you look at America using approximately 20% of our agricultural water and about 25% of our cropland to use food that never leaves the field or is never eaten, to me, that's really criminal. We don't just have climate change here, we have droughts here. That's a long-term problem here in Southern and Central California. And yet we continue to grow food in the same way and waste it in the same way. We've got to get smarter, and we've got to get committed to this.
I'd like to turn now to some questions from the audience. This is from Jacqueline Rivera Kraus. She asks, and I think this is addressed to Congressman Schiff, is there any policy change or governmental budget decision that would make service more possible for nonprofits or community organizations as they address community needs during the COVID crisis, or even in normal times? How can individuals assist with advocacy? So 2 questions there: making it easier for nonprofits to get into the game, and then individuals.
Thank you. You know, in terms of nonprofits, there are a couple of things that I'm deeply concerned about at this very instant, and I've been weighing in along with my colleagues to try to address. The first is that some of the waivers that USDA has been giving to make sure that there aren't artificial barriers to getting food out to people right now are expiring, and for inexplicable reasons, we haven't been able to get USDA to extend them. For example, in some of the boxed food, there's a requirement that cheese be part of that box. Well, if you have certain perishable goods in that box, that means that certain distributors won't take those boxes because they don't have the refrigerated capacity. And already I think we're seeing in places like LA County a 40% reduction in the ability to deliver those boxes of food because of these new requirements, because of the expiration of the waivers. So we're trying to get those waivers extended to make sure that that we don't put in place, you know, provisions that may in good times have a good foundation, but in the emergency right now are just hampering our ability to get food out to people. You know, other programs are set to expire next month, and we're hoping that they're extended because the need is not going to expire next month. So those programs, I think, are also essential. Finally, you know, the money that we put in the HEROES Act to help, you know, renters with their rent payments, and to help school districts that are like LA Unified. I was at a couple of their grab and go food delivery sites. They're among the largest food banks now anywhere in the country. They need resources to do that, and they need waivers, and we were able to get one recently, which is very important. to facilitate that delivery of food. In terms of what the public can do, public outcry really makes a difference. You know, the government does respond to what it hears. When the Postal Service Postmaster General was taking steps to cripple the Postal Service in the run-up to the election, people spoke out all over the country, and the result was the Postmaster General had to back down, had to reinstate overtime, and had to cease taking out sorting machines. You know, the government does respond to outcry, and so it would be very helpful for the public to weigh in any manner they can with their elected representatives, and publicly to underscore the priority and the need to help people eat right now.
For people who are on the Facebook page now and have a link to your web portal, is there information for all the different congressional districts in Southern California for people who are watching?
You know, we certainly have a lot of information on my website, www.schiff.gov, and so people can look it up that way. But they can also go to the General House website to identify who their House members are, or how to get in communication with their members of the Senate, how to weigh even with the White House. So that's all just a Google search away. And I would encourage people also to write letters to the editor, or to use whatever means they can, try to set up Zoom meetings with their representatives where that's possible. All of that helps move the ball forward.
Evan, can I jump in real quick on that question, just to
Sure, of course.
A close perspective? So at the end of this week, Food Forward is going to see the expiration of the Farmers to Family Box Program, period 2. As of this moment, we have 0 allotment for boxes moving forward on Monday. We've been moving 50,000 boxes a week across the entire Southern California region. Basically, that's 50,000 families getting fed fresh produce every single week. That will stop. As of this minute, we have 0 contracts and 0 commitments. And that is changing for a number of reasons I won't get into. But for people who want to get involved, reaching out to their representative, as Congressman Schiff said, reaching out to the Agriculture Committee of Congress is essential for them to hear from your everyday Jane and John Doe on their concern around these programs. These programs, the Farm to Family program, is in my head, a emergency food program. SNAP is emergency as well, but it's long-term care. My feeling is we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can have these USDA programs and SNAP happening simultaneously, because look, SNAP does not address undocumented immigrants, okay? We now have 1.5 million undocumented folks in the counties that Food Forward serves alone, and 2.6 million in California statewide. We depend on these people. They're emergency food folks. They're people who are working on the front lines and do not have the income or the voice. They need to be fed. They need to have opportunities for this emergency food. And I feel that individuals watching this can very easily, again, in a few clicks, reach out to their representatives and let them know why these programs need to continue. We are nowhere near the end of this pandemic, and we're nowhere near the end of the economic collapse that was a result of it. So we may see numbers descending, thankfully, in LA County and California, and even in the US as far as COVID cases, but it's a long road back for an economic recovery. And I really want to urge folks to take a few minutes, 5 minutes of their day, write their congressman, their senator, and the Agriculture Committee, and just keep people's feet to the fire to fund these essential programs.
I have another question, this one from Joel, who is asking, in this time of COVID-19, is there any legislation in the works to help protect the vulnerable folks who are instrumental in getting food to our tables? Folks who have paradoxically been deemed essential, farm workers, field workers, meat processing plant workers. We just saw JBS fined an enormous fine, that enormous meat packer, for not keeping people safe.
We're making a real effort, and the very name of the HEROES Act is meant to encompass what the bill is about, which is to help exactly these folks who are essential workers. Many of them themselves are at risk of food insecurity, ironically, and they're putting themselves out for our benefit, and they're often most in need of economic assistance, of food assistance, protective gear. And all of these things are part of the HEROES Act. So yes, we are working to help this very essential and important but vulnerable population. And as Rick was saying, it's also a lot of people of color. And part of the reason, just one part of the reason why COVID has been so much more deadly in communities of color is that a lot of these essential workers who can't work from home are people of color. And so I think this HEROES Act legislation and the provision it makes for exactly the folks this question pertains to are so important.
How close are you, do you think, to having it pass?
If you ask me that question tomorrow, it may differ than my sense today. I think things just got a little bit more likely to succeed than not. The conventional wisdom a few days ago was that it was more likely to fail, that we weren't going to get to a deal. I think we will get to a deal. I think there's just too much riding on it and too many people depending on it. So I hope and pray that we do get to a deal. What we're contending with, to be candid, is more than half of my GOP colleagues don't want to do anything more. They're not happy with how much we've already done. They're prepared to let the states go bankrupt and the cities go bankrupt and people defend for themselves. It's an attitude, best summarized by Ivanka Trump, find something new. But that kind of let them eat cake philosophy, just doesn't cut it. And so it does make the negotiation very difficult when you're negotiating with folks that really don't want to do anything except find political cover. But the need is so great that we're going to stay at it until we get it done. But we do want to make sure that whatever deal we agree to meaningfully helps people in need. We're not really interested in some kind of a political statement. We want something that is serious about helping those in need.
Congressman, I'd love to ask a question myself. I rarely get the chance to talk to someone in your position. And you're in the thick of this and you've been fighting this fight for a long time. These last 4 years have been particularly surreal. And I do wonder, when you meet your colleagues from the other side of the aisle one-on-one, if their approach is as heels dug in, or is there a lot of political theater around this? I ask this because, to me, what I've noticed as someone whose career is in nonprofit is we do our work around the concept of empathy and helping others. And so much of what we see go on in politics, especially right now, feels void of that concept. And I do wonder, when you speak with these people individually and not in front of a camera and not in front of a voting scenario, do you see that empathy come through? Or is there really this belief that let them eat cake?
I see both, to be candid. You do have members in private conversations express grave doubts, grave concerns about their own party, their own administration, and you do see sympathy for what people are going through. But at the same time, you see a great many members, and probably a majority, who, for philosophical or other reasons, just don't feel the federal government should do any more. Who have adopted the president's point of view that, well, it's just the blue states that need the help, not the red states. It's just the Democratic terrible mayors and terrible governors. That's all nonsense, but it has become sort of a political theology. And over time, there has been an increasing unwillingness of my GOP colleagues to show any distance between themselves and the president. And that's been, I think, deeply tragic for the Republican Party. It's become a cult of the president. So whatever the president says goes. But I do think there are moments still of unguarded conversations where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will acknowledge that what their own party is doing doesn't make any sense, is not in the interest of the country or the party. They just want to, I think, hunker down and wait it out. But while they're hunkering down and waiting things out, there are people that are starving and families that are losing their businesses. There are families that are losing the accumulated savings of the last 20 years. And so I frankly have grown fatigued with private misgivings. I'm not really particularly interested in private misgivings anymore. I hope that if we turn the corner in the fall, that the GOP will revert back to its roots of having an ideology. It's important for our country to have two healthy parties. We only have one at the moment, but I want to underscore, and we're voting in groups right now, and my staff just showed me a note saying my group is voting next, so I'm going to have to leave very shortly to go vote. But I appreciate both of what you do, Evan, in your efforts to get good information out to the American people on these issues, and Rick, the work you do every day. The observation you were making earlier, Rick, about this is a distribution problem. It's not a production problem, I think is one that really needs to be impressed upon everyone that I work with in the Capitol. Because that makes it so much more manageable for us to wrap our head around. We can feed everyone. I think we knew that implicitly, but we need to figure out these problems of distribution, and we should be able to do that. So I really appreciate both of what you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the time you've given us this morning. We don't want to keep you longer. We don't want you to be late for the vote. Really, thank you so much for everything you're doing. This cannot be easy. And I just want to say that this fight, or this intransigence between our two parties, the sad thing is all these constituencies that are being left in the lurch and forgotten, because after all, this is all about people. And to thrive as a country, we need every citizen possible to be thriving as individuals. So hopefully we can get back to that place soon. I'd like to give Rick the opportunity to wrap up with some final thoughts and maybe some call outs on what people can do to help Food Forward in their response specifically. Thank you so much, Congressman Schiff.
Thank you. If you'll excuse me to go vote, I'm going to leave Rick to conclude. But once again, thank you so much for including me.
Thank you, Congressman. Stay strong. We appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Evan, I appreciate the opportunity to wrap up. I would say one thing that was very clear to me when Food Forward started is that hunger is a bipartisan issue. We have people who are in deep need in red states and in blue states. And one of the things we found so easy to translate about the mission of Food Forward and our work is that it really crosses party lines. So where we had a Democratic congressman on the line today, I would welcome that opportunity to speak with an independent or especially a Republican, because I think in the heart of hearts, people understand food is indeed an essential need. And without it, we just don't survive. It's just that simple. Food Forward in a normal year would use upwards of 4,000 to 5,000 volunteers. And unfortunately, due to the health crisis, we can't do that. But we are retooling some of our volunteer opportunities. So if people want to volunteer, they can sign up on our website at foodforward.org. Very importantly, they can donate to us. Again, the same link, foodforward.org, tax-deductible donations go at well under 10 cents a pound to buy produce. We would love people to reach out, most importantly right now, to their representatives and to let them know that the Farmers to Family box program should be refunded, and that the produce boxes, which have been so helpful and so essential to hundreds of thousands of families, continue beyond October 31st. Again, it is a multiple beneficial program that is not just feeding the hungry, but it's mitigating the waste in our fields, and it's affecting in a positive way climate change. I'll leave it with those simple points. Very grateful to Congressman Schiff, very grateful to you, Evan, for moderating today, and for folks tuning in. If they're interested in more about food waste and how they can get involved in any side of the equation that I spoke about, again, our website is there 24/7 and a great resource and portal into both the LA community and what's happening around the country on these issues.
I'd like to ask you a favor. If you could, on your Facebook, some more specific information about the box program so that people know what to speak to specifically when they contact their representatives.
Absolutely. We'll get that posted by midday today, and folks can hit us up at the Food Forward page on Facebook, and I'm sure we'll push it out through Twitter and Instagram as well. Signing up for our social media is also a great way to not just help us, but we have a very robust communications team that is pushing out articles about protecting farm workers, innovations that are happening around food waste and feeding folks all over the country and all over the world. So stay up, to date with the information we put out, and especially for these calls to action.
Thank you so much, Rick, for everything that you and your colleagues over at Food Forward are doing. I can't imagine the landscape in Los Angeles without you anymore. You have done
I appreciate
so much in such a short period of time. And thank you for taking the time to have this discussion for all of us today. That concludes our town hall. Have a great day, everyone. Be active.